My name is Bo Lawson. I was 36 when this started, working as a park ranger in the Texas Hill Country and taking extra ranch hand shifts on the Morales spread because my father's cardiology bills did not care what my county salary looked like. I know how this sounds now, and I know what people hear when a man says he met something he cannot file under species, weather, or bad judgment. I am telling you anyway because I used to be the one rolling his eyes in the feed store when old men traded stories about shapes and cedar breaks. I trusted trail maps, boot prints, gut piles, fence voltage, and rainfall totals. Then one night, something breathed through the seam of my cabin wall like it owned the dark, and I stopped believing the world was fully explainable. Before that night, my life was clean lines and repeatable checks. I woke at 4:45 every workday, put coffee on a 2-burner stove, and stood on the cabin step while the percolator rattled itself awake. The line cabin sat on the boundary where state preserve land met Morales cattle country. A weathered one-room box framed in old cedar with a shallow porch and a wind-bent pecan tree leaning over the roof. In early light, the hills looked harmless. Layered limestone and juniper and live oak, pale grass silvered with dew. By noon they turned hard and bright, heat rising off caliche roads and visible waves. At night they swallowed sound in pockets and gave it back when they felt like it. My ranger route started with invasive species checks along the lower trails, mostly feral hog rooting damage and Chinaberry spread near the creek crossings. After that, I serviced game cameras, checked posted boundaries, and logged any unauthorized fire rings or dumped trash. It was not glamorous work, but it was mine. And I liked that most days had a shape to them. If you marked enough points on a map, people and animals both started to make sense. Even the odd stuff, 9 times out of 10, turned out ordinary when you measured it right. By late afternoon on my off days, I crossed onto Morales land and switched hats. The ranch was big enough that a man could drive 40 minutes and still be inside the same fence line. South pasture was mesquite and scrub. North fields ran open with windmills, stock tanks, and low cattle guards that rattled your teeth if you hit them faster than 15. The east side dropped into broken cedar ravines, where light went thin before sunset. I did feed runs, mended fence where hogs burrowed under, checked trough pumps, and logged mineral block use. I was not family, but I was trusted. Around there, that meant more than a contract. Elena Morales ran the place after her husband died, and she did it with a clipboard in one hand and a fence stretcher in the other. She was practical in the exact way I respected. If I said a gate hinge needed replacing, she asked for dimensions, not drama. If a calf was limping, she wanted time, location, and likely cause. We talked mostly in task language, but there was kindness under it. On Thursdays, she left a foil-wrapped plate on my truck seat if she knew I had a double shift. Brisket, beans, 2 tortillas. No note needed. My father lived 80 miles away in a small house he refused to leave. On Sundays, I drove in with groceries, fixed whatever had failed that week, and sat with him while he pretended he did not need help, standing up from his recliner. He had worked pipeline his whole life and had opinions about softness that could strip paint. After his second procedure, he got quiet in a way that scared me more than any monitor beeping in a hospital room. "You don't have to run yourself ragged for me," he told me once while I was replacing his porch light fixture. I tightened the mount and looked down at him. "I am not running ragged. I am organized." He snorted. "That's so. Organized men don't fall asleep in work boots. Then I am efficient too. He gave me one of those sideways looks he used when I was 16 and pretending I had not dented his truck. Take care of yourself, Bo. Money is one thing. You burn out, you can't buy yourself back. That sat with me longer than I admitted. I kept the extra shifts anyway. If you had watched me then, you would have called me steady. I carried the same thermos every evening patrol, black and dented near the base, where it fell off a tailgate 3 years earlier. I kept spare batteries in labeled zip bags, 2 trauma kits in the ranch truck, and an old .308 behind the side for hogs and coyotes if something turned aggressive near livestock. I was not a gun hobbyist. It was a tool, same as bolt cutters or a post driver. I did not drink on shift, did not spook easy, and did not tell stories bigger than the evidence. That mattered to me, maybe more than it should have. Town talk never made my list of concerns. In the diner off Highway 12, men with weathered faces would lower their voices around closing and mention tall shapes crossing low water after midnight, or hearing heavy steps on dry leaves with no wind and no moon. I heard all of it while eating eggs and reading burn ban updates. I figured grief, boredom, and whiskey explained most legends. The rest was misidentification. People see what fear gives them when darkness takes the details away. My cabin routine at night was as fixed as sunrise. Park the truck nose out for fast exit. Sweep the yard with a spotlight. Check door latch, window pins, and radio charge. Boots by the bed. Jeans folded over the chair. Keys on the nail by the sink. I wrote down livestock counts and water levels before sleep, not because anyone demanded it, but because records keep your head clear. Chaos grows in unlogged corners. The first hairline crack in that certainty came in a drainage draw west of the old windmill, a place I crossed so often I could have driven it blindfolded. The whitetail used to move through there right at dusk. 2, 5, sometimes 10 at a time, picking their way toward the cedar line. Then over 3 evenings they stopped. Not fewer. Stopped. Same weather, same season pressure, same moon phase. Empty ground where movement should have been. I marked it down as predation shift and kept moving. Mountain lion activity could reroute deer patterns quick. So could feral dog packs. I made a note to set an extra camera near the crossing. The cattle changed next. Morales had a mixed herd that usually spread out after evening feed, loose clusters drifting toward familiar grazing zones. 1 week in, I found them bunching tight against the northern fence before full dark. Shoulders pressed so close they looked like one broad living wall. Even the older cows that normally wandered off stood packed in, heads high, ears fixed toward the cedar breaks. I killed the truck engine and listened. No calls from calves, no hoof shuffle beyond the tight group shifting weight. Just that strained, waiting stillness you see before a thunderhead breaks. Except the sky was clear and the barometer steady. I stepped down and walked the line with my flashlight. Fence was intact. No recent breach, no snagged hide, no drag marks. One heifer flinched when my beam crossed her flank and backed hard into the wire. That was unlike her. I knew that cow by ear tag and temperament, both. At the dog run behind the equipment shed, the ranch dogs gave me my next warning, and I ignored it, because men like me build lives on explanations. Tuck and Raina were healers with more grit than sense, animals that would chase hogs twice their size and come back looking proud of bad decisions. After sundown, they stopped leaving the porch. They stood at the threshold, with paws planted, ears pinned flat, staring into the cedar as if waiting for permission from something out there. I clapped, whistled, used their names. Tuck whined low in his throat and pressed against my leg but wouldn't step off the boards. By the second week of September, my patrols began crossing pockets of silence that made my scalp tighten before my mind caught up. In one stretch near the south tank, the cicadas cut out mid-stride like someone had thrown a switch. No frogs from the seep below the berm, no nightjars. Then 30 yards later, full sound again. Normal insect wall, normal frog calls, everything back. I tested that patch 3 nights in a row, same result. Silence in a rough oval, maybe 40 feet across, then sound returning outside it. The smell arrived with the silence and then started showing up without it. Wet fur and something sour, like old meat left in shade, layered with damp earth after rain. It would hit all at once in still air and vanish. The second wind came through. I told myself, dead feral hog in brush. I told myself bacterial bloom near stagnant water. I told myself a lot of things that sounded good until they failed repeat testing. One night after a light rain, I found tracks in caliche mud by the service road that loops behind my cabin. The print was long, longer than my spread hand, with deep claw impressions angled forward, hard enough to punch through the soft top layer into packed ground below. Heel shape was narrow, not broad like a bear. Toe spacing looked wrong for coyote, wrong for dog, wrong for anything local that matched the depth. I crouched with my tape measure and stared at it until my knees hurt. Erosion distortion, I said out loud, because hearing your own voice can keep stupid thoughts from growing teeth. I scanned for companion prints and found a sequence that made less sense the farther I tracked it. 2 impressions that suggested a bipedal stride, then a shift into 4-point contact for several yards, then back to 2. The spacing changed with each pattern, but the depth stayed heavy. Whatever made it carried real mass. I bagged photos with scale markers and cast the cleanest print in plaster from my field kit. Procedure calmed me. Coordinates, timestamp, weather, substrate, direction of travel. If you can document it, you can solve it. That was the rule. The next morning I pulled camera cards and scrubbed timestamps frame by frame. Deer, raccoon, 1 feral hog sounder, 2 false triggers from grass movement, nothing matching the track dimensions. I checked clock drift on the units, battery levels, sensor angles, all normal. I replaced 2 cards anyway and repositioned a camera to cover the drainage crossing. At the ranger office, I filed a routine note about livestock agitation near preserve border and elevated predator uncertainty. My supervisor, Dale, read it with half his lunch sandwich in one hand and his glasses slipping down his nose. "You're writing this like a detective report," he said. "Predator pressure happens. You want me to assign a monster task force? Want you to log unusual patterns before someone loses goats?" I said. He leaned back, dry smile, office AC rattling above us. "Bo, you spend too many nights out there and the internet gets in your head. It's cats, hogs, maybe a big stray dog. Go home and sleep." I nodded because arguing in fluorescent light never fixed anything. But the dismissal settled in me like grit under a contact lens. I had data, not campfire smoke, and still, I got the grin people use when they think you are drifting. 2 nights later, I called the county line after hearing heavy footfalls circle my cabin at 2:17 in the morning. Deliberate pace. Pause near the window. Move again. Too heavy for deer. Too measured for hogs. By the time a deputy rolled through on a courtesy check, the sounds were gone. He walked the perimeter with me, found no forced entry, no clear tracks in the hardpack, and handed me the same prescription as everyone else. Get some sleep, Lawson. You're keyed up. Something was out there. Something's always out there. He did not say it mean. That was almost worse. After he left, I sat at my small table with the radio off and the cabin lights low, trying to keep my identity intact by force of logic. I am a ranger, I told myself. I map known territory. I classify sign. I do not invent predators in the dark because frogs go quiet and dogs get skittish. I tried to convince myself fatigue was amplifying normal cues, that stress over my father's health was bending patterns into threats, that isolation can make a man overfit bad data to dramatic conclusions. The reasoning was clean. The fear stayed anyway. Every night brought new sign in new places, and each explanation broke against the next piece of evidence like glass on limestone. By the end of that week, I had 3 casts curing on a shelf, 12 photos with scale markers, 2 pages of logged silence pockets, and a smell I couldn't wash from the inside of my nose. I kept doing the rounds because routine was the last thing that felt solid. But when the sun dropped behind the ridges and cedar shadows stitched the pastures together, I started checking the tree line first, then the fence, then my own reflection in the truck window, like I expected to see somebody standing just beyond it, watching me count what could still be counted. That night I made one change to routine and hated myself for needing it. I moved the truck from its usual spot and backed it tight to the porch steps so I could go door to seat in 2 strides. Then I set a second spotlight on the windowsill and angled it toward the cedar break east of the cabin. It felt like admitting fear out loud. I told myself it was just risk management, no different from carrying 2 spare tires on a remote route. But my hands moved faster than normal, and I checked the same latch twice without meaning to. The hills held heat after sunset, and the cabin walls gave it back in shallow waves that smelled like dust and old wood glue. I sat at the table with my logbook open and listened to night settle in layers. First, the wind eased. Then the cicadas rose. Then somewhere far down the draw, a calf called once and went quiet. At 9:42, both dogs at the equipment shed started a low warning growl that carried clear through still air. Not barking, not challenge, just that throat-deep vibration dogs use when they know the distance between them and trouble is shrinking. I killed the lamp and went outside with the handheld light, keeping my boots on gravel so I could hear anything moving through grass. The beam swept fence posts, mesquite trunks, the rusted gate chain, and for a moment everything looked almost normal. Then the smell hit, stronger than before, wet fur and sour rot, with a metallic edge like hot coins. It sat in one narrow band along the east side of the yard. 2 steps left, it faded. 2 steps right, it came back hard enough to sting the back of my throat. Territory lines. Invisible, but real. I followed the scent band 30 yards until it crossed the service road, and there I found fresh impressions pressed into damp dust where no vehicle had passed since noon. Long footprints with deep claw cuts, parallel gouges at entry and shallow drag at exit, as if weight transferred from a high stance to a lower one mid-stride. The spacing between tracks stretched wider than my own step by half again. I measured anyway, called out numbers in a steady voice for the audio note on my phone, and planted scale tabs for photos. Procedure gave me a framework when my nerves were trying to sprint. The next sign came at the north pasture fence. One steel T-post was bent 5 degrees inward from the ranch side, not sheared, just leaned, as if something heavy had shouldered it without hurry. The wire between that post and the corner brace had 2 strands bowed and one snapped clean, not with the frayed twist hogs usually leave when they root under. At ground level, the dirt was scuffed in arcs, heel-like impressions and hand-like marks mixed in, and on a cedar trunk 8 feet up I found 3 shallow grooves in the bark, fresh enough to show pale wood beneath the gray outer layer. I stood on tiptoe with my tape, and still could not reach the top of the highest line. On the next night, the pattern stopped looking episodic. It looked adaptive. I checked drainage first and found nothing there, then cut back toward the pumps and found fresh sign exactly where I had not looked since the previous shift. On the following run, I parked by the goat pens, stayed there longer than usual, and later found disturbed ground behind the hay barn where my light had never passed. Before dawn on a third straight pass, I discovered fist-sized rocks arranged in a rough line across the cabin path. Not natural scatter from runoff, more like markers set by something testing whether I noticed change. That detail bothered me more than damage did. Predators follow prey, scent, hunger. They do not usually run little field experiments. I asked Elena to ride a quick perimeter with me before dawn on her way to the sale barn. We bumped along the eastern fence in gray light while she drank coffee from a thermos older than mine. When I showed her the bent post and bark grooves, she squinted, stepped down, and ran her fingers over the wood fibers. "Could be a cat stretching up," she said first, then looked at the height and exhaled through her nose. "No, not that high. Maybe 2 things happened here." "Maybe," I said, "but the track set by the road matches this line." She watched me for a beat, reading whether I had crossed from cautious to spooked. "I believe you saw something. I also need this ranch running. We add lights on this stretch and pull calves from that corner at dusk. You keep logging. No hero stuff." "No hero stuff," I said. It was a practical exchange, maybe 80 words total, and it helped more than sympathy would have. She did not laugh. She did not call it folklore. She adjusted operations and treated my data as operational input. That kept me moving. That evening, I expanded documentation like I was building a case file for a board that would never meet. I mounted 2 additional trail cameras at shoulder height instead of knee height, angled one across the silence pocket by the south tank, and buried magnetic driveway alarms along the cabin approach where brush funneled movement. I dusted the rear window frame with chalk powder to catch contact, strung fishing line with aluminum tags at shin level around the porch, and tested fence voltage at 6 points every night. All readings landed where they should, but something kept passing through the perimeter without tripping what should have tripped. The failures were not random. Camera 1 captured a normal sequence until 1:13, then 4 minutes of black frames despite full battery and no error code, then normal again. Camera 2 recorded 2 deer, then a frame where both were mid-step with heads snapped toward the same off-screen point, ears locked, and the timestamp jumped ahead 11 seconds with no transition. The driveway alarms chirped twice at 2:04 and 2:06, yet when I checked outside, there were no tracks on the hardpack and no sway in the grass where anything larger than a rabbit could have moved. Technology did not collapse all at once. It skipped in narrow windows, like static in a clean radio channel. I kept trying ordinary explanations because that is how you stay functional in the field. escaped exotic from a private game ranch, wolf-dog hybrid with severe mange-altering silhouette, black bear wandering down from farther north despite no recent confirmed sign in this county, a person in a ghillie suit playing a sick game and strong enough to lean steel posts. Each theory had one piece that fit and three that did not. The two-legged to four-legged gait change broke the bear model. Height broke the dog model. Speed and silence broke the person model. I wrote all of it down anyway because being wrong on paper is still better than being vague in your head. Just after midnight on the next full loop, I made a final stop at the goat pens before turning in. The moon was a thin smear behind high cloud, enough light to show fence lines, but not enough to trust depth. Goats were restless, packed away from the east rail, eyes white-rimmed. I switched off the truck engine and heard the silence settle all at once, total and immediate, as if a lid came down over the pasture. No insects, no frogs, no wind in cedar. Then one sound carried from beyond the pen, low and rhythmic, the draw and push of air through a chest with too much capacity, not close enough to pinpoint, close enough to feel. I stood still with the rifle up and scanned the rail gap where the beam narrowed between two posts. Nothing visible, but every goat stared at the same dark seam and would not blink. That was the clearest sign yet. Predatory focus had moved from territory display to approach behavior, and it was watching the enclosure from cover while I stood in open ground like bait. I backed to the truck without turning my shoulders, got inside, and kept the doors locked while I called dispatch for a wildlife advisory. The operator took my location, asked if I had visual confirmation, and when I said negative, patched me to a night supervisor who sounded tired but polite. "You saying mountain lion?" he asked, "or something else?" "I am saying large unknown predator with repeat proximity to livestock and cabin. I need a warden out here at first light." Pause. Keyboard clicks. "We can put a note in. No units till morning unless active attack." "There's a pattern. It's escalating." "I hear you. Wait, stay inside and keep lights on." He meant well. It still felt like being set adrift. I did not sleep much. At 5:30, I drove to the preserve office, turned in overnight logs, and caught Dale by the map board before he left for a public meeting. I spread printed photos across his desk, including the bark grooves, bent post, and two clearest prints with measurements. He looked them over longer this time, which I took as progress, until he tapped the page and gave me that same tired half smile. "Bo, this is stress-chasing shadows," he said. "You're working doubles, your dad's sick, and now every coyote print looks like a monster movie. Take 2 days, hydrate. If you still feel jumpy, I'll swap your night routes. Those grooves are above my reach. People stand on things. People fake things. Why would anyone fake this on active pasture?" He shrugged. "People do weird things. Do not build a legend out of bad sleep." The crux was not whether he trusted me. It was whether his framework allowed for data that did not fit his training. Mine barely did either, and I was the one out there smelling it. I left his office, drove straight to county wildlife, and caught game warden Luis Herrera as he was fueling his truck. Luis was a decade older than me, calm under pressure. Not a man who wasted words. I respected him because he investigated first and theorized later. He listened while I gave coordinates and chronology, then flipped through my photos on the hood of his truck. "These tracks are odd," he said. "Could be substrate distortion. Could be two animals overlapping. Could be. But look at stride continuity here. He nodded once. I can run a pass this evening, off record if needed. No promises on finding anything in daylight. I will take daylight, dusk, anything. He held my gaze long enough to signal he understood stakes, even if he was not ready to name them. Keep your logs tight. If this turns into depredation, paperwork matters. Luis ran the first pass that evening and found sign that was enough to concern him and not enough to escalate formally. A half circle of deep impressions near the ravine lip. Then nothing. He came back the following evening and found hair snagged on low wire that looked canine under quick field check, but too coarse for local breeds. He bagged a sample and sent it to a lab through normal channels. When the report came back, it read degraded, inconclusive, not contaminated, not matchable. Another dead end that still felt like information. That evening, with daylight thinning early and cloud building from the west, I made what I told myself was a controlled test. I parked at the moonless fence repair point where I had first noticed the scent bands, shut down every non-essential light, and sat with my headlamp off for 10 minutes to let my eyes adjust. The cedar line became a single dark wall, textured only by small breaks, where limestone reflected dull sky. I listened to my own breathing until it slowed, then swept the headlamp in measured arcs. Left fence corner, center gap, right cedar cluster. Repeat. On the fourth pass, I caught them, 2 reflections suspended in the dark at a height that put my neck muscles on ice, amber green and steady, set too far apart for any cat I had ever tracked, and too high for deer unless it stood on a berm that was not there. They did not flare and vanish like normal eyeshine. They held, blinked once sideways, and fixed on me with stillness that felt deliberate. I snapped up the rifle-mounted light to lock position and identify shape. The beam hit trunks, brush, and empty air. No crash through leaves, no branch snap, no retreat noise at all. Just absence, where presence had been. And then from somewhere near my left shoulder and several yards back, where nothing should have crossed unseen, that damp bellows, breathing again, close enough to rough the hair on my arms. I kept the light moving and reached the truck one careful step at a time, because in that moment I understood with total clarity that I was not tracking a confused animal wandering through ranch country. Something predatory was tracking me back. I eased the driver door open without taking my eyes off the cedar line, slid in, and locked all 4 doors, even though the old ranch truck locks stuck in damp weather and made a loud metal snap when they caught. The cab smelled like coffee grounds and hot vinyl. My pulse was hammering high in my throat, sharp enough that I had to force my breathing into counts to keep my hands usable. I set the rifle across my lap, swept the mounted light through the windshield, then through both side mirrors, then over my own shoulder inside the cab like a fool, half expecting to find something crouched in the back seat. Nothing. Just darkness and my own beam cutting dust. The breathing came again. One long draw, one controlled release. This time from somewhere behind the truck bed. Not rushed. Not winded. Patient. I started the engine. The old V8 turned once, twice, then caught hard and roared louder than I wanted. Headlights flooded the fence line in pale yellow, and for a second I thought I saw movement at the edge of the beam, a vertical shift, like a person stepping back from a doorway. Then it was gone. No brush crash, no hoofbeat, no coyote sprint. Gone in a way that made my skin crawl because it meant either I was wrong about where it stood or it could move faster and quieter than anything I had field experience with. I drove the quarter-mile to the cabin with the high beams on and the spotlight running from the window mount, sweeping left and right until my shoulder cramped. When the porch came into view, I saw both ranch dogs at the equipment shed, pressed flat against the boards, staring past my headlights toward the same tree break, where I had seen the eyes. They did not bark. They did not even whine. They just tracked that darkness like there was a line there they could not cross and did not dare test. Inside, I shut the door, dropped the crossbar in place, and stood with my back against the cedar planks, listening. The cabin had always sounded small at night. Refrigerator hum, boards ticking with temperature shift, wind under the eaves. That night, every noise felt diagnostic, like I was sorting harmless sounds from fatal ones by ear alone. I moved through the routine anyway because routine kept panic from becoming useless. Window pins checked, radio on charge, sidearm loaded on the table, go bag at the rear window. I logged the encounter in block letters so hard the pen cut the page. Eye shine at estimated 7 feet plus. Color amber green. Lateral blink observed. No body confirmation. Breathing source non-localized. Near field high volume. At 1:08, the first driveway alarm chirped. Not the two-tone false ping I got from rabbits. A full alert. I killed the lamp and stayed still. 30 seconds later, another chirp came from the unit I had buried near the pecan tree. Then another from the one by the rain barrel on the east side. Whatever was outside was not wandering. It was walking a line around the cabin and tripping sensors in sequence, clockwise. I called Luis Herrera because he had at least looked at the evidence without grinning. He answered on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep, but instantly awake when he heard mine. "Bo, what happened?" I got eyes at the fence repair point, wrong height, wrong spacing, lost visual, and had close breathing behind my truck. It followed me to the cabin. My alarms are tripping in a ring right now. He did not fill the silence with comfort. He asked practical questions. Any entry attempt? Any livestock distress? Any clean shot? No entry yet. Dogs are frozen. Cattle are north tonight, so I cannot hear them from here. No clean body visual. Then you stay inside and keep hard cover between you and windows. I can roll, but I am 40 minutes out minimum. I looked at the thin cedar wall and hated how flimsy it felt all of a sudden. 40 might be too long if it decides to test the door. A pause, then. "Do you have vehicle clear for exit?" Truck is nose out by the porch. "Good. If you lose wall integrity, move. Do not chase visual confirmation. Survive first, prove later." The line clicked dead after he told me to text live location and keep it updating. That exchange probably ran 90 words, maybe a little more. It sounded like two men discussing a downed fence in bad weather, and that calm tone helped me hold center. For the next hour, I watched through a 2-inch gap between curtain and frame, sweeping the spotlight in short, controlled arcs. Twice I caught reflections, and twice they vanished when the beam steadied. Not low to the ground, not weaving like raccoons. High level. Measuring distance. The second time they appeared 30 feet from where they had first shown, with no transition movement between. My rational brain kept trying to patch ordinary explanations into place. Branch fork, reflecting my own light. Owl eyes at a strange angle. Stress distortion after too many double shifts. I tried each one like a key in a lock. None turned. Around 2:17, the same time the footfalls had circled nights earlier, the outside sounds went flat. Even the wind dropped. I heard a soft scrape on the cabin's east wall, not heavy enough to be an impact, more like claws dragging slow over cedar grain to map the surface. Then silence. Then one wet exhale through the seam near the window frame, close enough that the curtain edge stirred inward. I jerked back, side arm up, breath locked in my chest. No face appeared. No snout, no hand, no body mass, only that breath and 2 points of amber green catching a sliver of my porch light from outside, suspended at a height where no known local predator should have been able to look directly through my window without rearing. I fired no shots because I had no target discrimination, and rounds through old cedar can ricochet wrong in tight spaces. I kept the weapon trained and counted seconds. The eyes blinked once, slow and sideways again, then dropped out of the narrow light angle. A moment later, I heard weight shift off the wall and into the yard. 2 steps on what sounded like rear limbs, then a fast 4-beat pattern that cut across the gravel and disappeared toward the ravine. The transitions were smooth, practiced, like mode changes, not stumbles. By the time Luis arrived, gray light was just lifting the ridge line. We walked the perimeter together, and he found what I had feared and wanted at once. 3 fresh claw scores in the cedar siding under the east window, each about as long as my index finger and set with even spacing, plus 2 compressed prints in damp soil by the porch post. The prints were partial, but one showed a narrow heel and deep toe punctures with forward bite. Luis photographed everything, bagged scrapings from the siding, and crouched there a long time without speaking. Finally he stood and said, "I cannot classify this from partials. You think I am seeing things?" He shook his head once. "I think something large with unusual gait came right up to your wall. That is what I can say on record today." On record today. Those 3 words told me where the line was. Evidence that fit forms moved. Evidence that did not fit stalled. I respected him more for admitting it straight. Morning burned off and routine tried to reassert itself. I checked trough levels, ran fence voltage, and did feed in the south lot, while pretending my heartbeat had returned to baseline. It had not. Every cedar shadow looked like concealment now. Every silence pocket felt like a marked boundary. I told myself daylight would normalize perspective. That night magnifies threat cues the same way mirrors magnify headlights. I told myself that if I could keep functioning through one full work cycle, my head would come back into alignment with the facts. By late afternoon, cloud banks rolled in from the west, tall, dark stacks pushing heat down ahead of them. The pressure drop made the cattle uneasy. They moved early toward shelter and kept glancing upslope. Elena called from the sale barn road to say she would be delayed and asked if I could secure the upper gate before the storm broke. I said yes, grabbed rain gear, and headed up the limestone track behind the cabin, where the ridge overlooked both the goat pens and the cedar ravine, and the first thunder came far off, a low roll. Wind shifted hard out of the north, carrying that same wet fur sourness in short gusts between clean rain smells. I stopped near the old survey marker and checked the slope below with binoculars. Nothing visible. Goats huddled tight. Fence line intact. I had just reached for the gate chain when lightning flashed behind the western ridge, turning the whole hillside into a black paper cutout for less than a second. In that strobe of white, I saw the silhouette. It stood on the limestone shelf above my cabin, broad through shoulders, narrow through waist, head thrust forward on a neck too upright for any canid and too elongated for a man in gear. The legs were the worst part, bent in a reverse-angled line that loaded weight high and left the lower segment too long, like a spring built wrong on purpose. One arm hung low, with the forelimb past knee height. The other was braced against a cedar trunk for balance. Even flattened by backlight, the proportions read as predatory mechanics, not human posture. Darkness slammed back in. Thunder cracked overhead. I froze, counting my breaths, trying to hold the image in memory before fear could distort it. Distance from marker to shelf was maybe 80 yards. The cedar trunk beside it was one I knew because it split near the base and grew around old fence wire. I had measured that tree in spring for a boundary maintenance note. 6 feet, 2 inches to the split. In the lightning frame, the top of the silhouette cleared it by more than a head. Second flash. It had moved 3 strides down slope without sound I could hear over the wind. Still bipedal. Shoulders rolling with controlled balance. Not the sway a person would have on wet limestone in boots. The head turned toward me and held. Third flash. Gone from the open shelf. I swung the rifle light down slope and caught only rain, brush, and silvered rock. Then from my right, farther along the ridge than it should have reached that fast, came the crunch of gravel under heavy weight, followed by 2 rapid impacts like forelimbs, hitting and pushing off. Biped to quadruped and back again. I did not need a full-body view to know what that meant anymore. I backed toward the truck, never giving it my side profile, boots slipping twice on wet stone. The storm opened in a hard sheet, drumming the hood, cutting visibility to 30 yards. Lightning gave me snapshots and black intervals between, and each snapshot showed absence where I expected movement, which was somehow worse than seeing it continuous. Predators that show themselves can be ranged. Predators that choose when to be seen run the clock. Halfway to the cab, I heard breathing behind the mesquite cluster to my left, deep and measured, then a low chuff that vibrated in my sternum more than my ears. I brought the light up. Nothing but rain threads. The smell hit strong enough to taste metal. My finger took up slack on the trigger, then stopped. No positive target, no shot. I reached the truck, got in, locked up, and rolled down 10 yards to widen my angle on the ridge. Lightning hit close enough to make the radio crackle, and in that bright white wash, I saw the silhouette one last time at the crest above the cabin, fully upright now, rain sheeting off it in lines that outlined bulk I could not explain away. Massive chest, narrow hips, head canted slightly as if evaluating, not raging. Then it stepped backward into cedar shadow and dissolved. I sat there through 3 thunder counts, with the wipers thudding full speed, and told myself what a rational man tells himself when reality starts to split. Storm light lies, distance lies, fatigue lies. Human pattern recognition will build monsters out of branches if you feed it enough fear. I said those things out loud in the cab, one after the other, and none of them felt true by the time I pulled down to the cabin and found fresh mud on my porch boards where no boot prints led in or out. I sat there with the wipers hammering and stared at that mud on my porch boards until the storm glare faded to plain dark again. The print smear was fresh enough to shine, 3 broad streaks and 1 deep puncture where a claw had bitten into soft cedar. No heel edge from a boot, no toe pattern from a dog, just weight, drag, and turn. My first urge was to lock the door and stay behind the wall until daylight, but the goats opened up from the east lot in one ragged burst of panic, boards banging, metal clanging, and I knew if the pen failed, Elena would lose animals before sunrise. Duty can be useful when fear starts making choices for you. It gives your hands something to do. I killed the engine, listened for 5 counts, then stepped down with rifle and spotlight. Rain had thinned to a hard drizzle, enough to silver the yard and turn every shadow into a moving edge. I checked the porch up close. Mud streaks crossed from the steps toward the window and back, but no clean track held shape long enough for casting. On the doormat, I found something that made my stomach tighten harder than the claw marks did. One aluminum tag from my fishing line alarm, clipped clean and set in the center of the mat like an object placed for me to notice. Not dropped, set. I had hung those tags at shin height around the porch perimeter 2 hours earlier. Nothing short of deliberate handling could have put one there. The goats slammed the rails again, louder, and that decided it. I moved to the truck, kept the spotlight sweeping, and drove toward the pens with lights high and the horn ready. The track to the east lot cuts between low cedar and a limestone hump that blocks line of sight until you're almost on top of the gate. I took it at 10 miles an hour, tires hissing in wet caliche, jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Halfway down, the smell rolled in through the vents, even with rain blowing opposite direction. Wet fur and sour meat, and that metallic tang behind it like pennies under your tongue. When my headlights cleared the hump, I saw it. It stood quarter-turned at the outside corner of the goat pen, one forelimb hooked over the top rail as if testing the give of the welded panel. The light hit hide first, dark and patchy, fur hanging in wet ropes over shoulders that looked built for pushing through brush and wire. Then the head angled toward me and I got the profile in full for 3 raw seconds. Elongated muzzle, not like a shepherd, not like a wolf, longer and heavier through the bridge. Wet black nose reflecting both headlights and twin points. Upper lip curled just enough to show canines packed tight and dense, more ivory than white in the rain glare. It did not bolt. That is the part my body understood faster than my mind. Every normal animal I had ever spotlighted near livestock gave me one of 3 responses: freeze, flee, or bluff. This thing assessed. Its eyes tracked from my windshield to the rifle barrel and back to my face as if it understood exactly what each one meant. Amber green shine, yes, but not flat reflection, focus, deliberate, steady focus. I braked hard and braced the rifle over the wheel, keeping the beam fixed. The forelimb came off the rail and dropped, and I saw the hand structure clearly in the wash from the truck lights. Not a paw, not a human hand either. Long digits ending in curved claws, each claw dark at the base and pale at the tip, flexing one by one as it shifted weight. The movement was independent, controlled, almost careful, like a man testing grip in wet gloves. Muscle rolled under the shoulder fur in layered bands when it repositioned, and there was old scarring across the right flank, where hair had never grown back evenly. The goats bunched to the far side of the pen and screamed in that high, choking way goats have when they know offense is the only thing left between them and teeth. I thought about firing through the windshield and did not, because I still had chain link, steel rail, and moving animals behind the target. I opened my door halfway for angle, shouldered the rifle, and shouted, voice rough from adrenaline and rain, "Get off that pen. Move." It answered with a low chuff, not loud, just enough to vibrate through the hood panel, then raised itself taller in one fluid rise that erased any remaining doubt about scale. Upright it stood near the top of the panel height marker I had welded last spring for sorting bulls, and that marker sat at 7 feet even. Its head cleared it by several inches, though it held a forward hunch, chest wide and deep, waist narrow, hips set for drive. The neck held too vertical for a canid frame, and when it turned, the range was wrong, head swiveling farther than I wanted to believe, while the shoulders stayed mostly fixed. I fired one warning shot into the limestone 20 feet left of it. The crack punched the night flat. It flinched, but not backward, sideways. Tactical movement, not panic, shifting behind the corner post where my angle worsened. Then it dropped to all fours for 2 strides so fast I almost lost it in the beam, forelimbs and hind limbs hitting in a pattern that was heavy yet efficient, and rose again near the feed barrel with rain streaming off its muzzle. The transition looked practiced, bipedal to quadrupedal and back without hesitation. Primal fear is a simple thing when it finally arrives. It strips vocabulary and leaves math. Distance, cover, ammo, exit route. I had maybe 30 yards between us, 1 truck door as partial shield, 8 rounds in the magazine plus 1 chambered sidearm at my hip, and no partner. I heard my own pulse in my ears and still caught the bellows deep breathing from across the pen, draw, release, draw. Each cycle steady as if exertion did not cost it much. I backed into the cab, kept muzzle out the window, and eased the truck forward to widen my line along the east rail. It mirrored me, matching the move on the far side of the pen. Eyes locked to mine. Every time I shifted left, it shifted right to keep the same angle through openings in the rails. Not random circling, counter positioning. It knew I was trying to cut off access to the goats, and it adjusted in real time. "Come on then," I heard myself say, voice thin and angry. "Come to me." That was not bravery. That was me trying to pull it away from livestock by making myself the easier problem to solve. For 1 second it bared its teeth fully, gums dark, canines thick, lower jaw wider than any local predator should carry. Then thunder rolled close overhead, and the goats surged as a group, slamming the panel so hard the hinge post rang. The thing glanced toward that motion, gave 1 short huff, and sprang backward over a low interior divider with a single bound. It landed, absorbed impact through those reverse-bent legs, and vanished behind stacked hay bales at the pen edge. I hit the horn, flooded the lot with high beams and spotlight, and drove a tight arc around the pens. No body and beam. No retreat crash through cedar. Just rain, steam off the hood, and goats panting in a knot so tight they looked welded together. On the outer fence line I found where it had crossed. Top wire pushed down, 1 cedar stay split, and fresh mud thrown in a fan pattern toward the ravine. Stride length too long for any dog and too narrow in heel for bear. I snapped photos with scale card while my hands shook hard enough to blur the first 3 shots. At 11:58, I called Luis from the truck with the engine running and the doors locked. "I got visual," I said. "Partial but clear. Goat pens east lot, upright height over 7, maybe closer to 8 with posture change. Hand-like forelimbs, independent claw flex, muzzle elongated, deliberate tracking behavior. It tested the rail." He did not argue. "Any injured stock?" "Not yet. Fence damage, panel impact, crossing sign fresh. You safe right now." "In the truck, moving back to cabin." "Do that. Lights on full, no outside checks alone. I am en route now, but weather may slow me. Keep recording everything you can without leaving cover. I am past recording for curiosity, Luis. It watched me like a person. A short pause. Rain hitting my windshield in sheets. Copy. Survive first. We sort labels later. I drove back with every light I had and parked nose out again. The moment I cut the engine, I noticed another wrong detail. My porch flood had been on when I left. Now it was off. Breaker had not tripped. The cabin interior still glowed from the kitchen lamp. I stepped up, rifle shouldered, and found the bulb intact, but unscrewed 3 turns, set gently in the socket, so it looked normal until power failed contact. I had tightened that bulb myself yesterday with pliers because the threads were worn. Wind could not do that. Rain could not do that. Inside, the table looked untouched at first glance. Then I saw my logbook. I always left it square to the table edge, pen clipped at the top. Now it sat open to the page with the first eyeshine entry, and a wet smear crossed the margin where my name was written. The pen was gone. So was one of my gloves from the chair back. I checked the floor, under the cot, under the stove. Nothing. The rear window latch, which I had set before the storm, hung open by 1 notch. No sign of forced break. No shattered glass, just that latch shifted. I did not like what my mind did with those facts. I told myself maybe I had rushed out and left the latch off. Maybe I knocked the logbook when I grabbed the go bag. Maybe the pen rolled and I missed it. I tried to convince myself of each point because the alternative was that something had stood in this room or reached through an opening and selected objects linked to me. Not to food, not to shelter, to me. At 12:26, while I was checking the rear sill with the spotlight, the driveway alarm by the pecan chirped once. Then the alarm by the rain barrel chirped. Then the one near the truck bed. Clockwise, same pattern as before. A ring tightening. I moved to the front window and scanned low first, then high. Nothing in the beam until I lifted to the fence line by the old windmill. There, at shoulder height on a post 15 yards out, hung my missing glove. Not torn, not chewed. Hooked over the top staple like somebody had set it there while making a point. The realization came cold and complete. This was not an animal blundering into human space and reacting to noise. It had watched my routine long enough to learn my paths, my lights, my blind spots, my response times. It had stood at my wall, circled my cabin, tested my porch, approached my livestock. And now it was moving my things as signals. I was not dealing with random overlap in territory. I was inside its decision-making loop. I texted Luis my live location again and added one line. It is targeting me now. He replied 30 seconds later. Stay hard inside. I am 12 minutes out. I kept every light on, dragged the metal tool chest against the rear window, and took position where I could cover the door and both side walls. Minutes stretched, each one measured by rain runoff and the tick of cooling engine metal outside. The alarms stayed silent for almost 5 full minutes, and that silence was worse than movement because it meant repositioning. Then I heard it from the east wall, close enough that cedar grain carried it like a drum skin. 1 scrape. 2. A slow drag of claws testing seams between planks. I held the rifle steady and forced my breathing into counts again, but my hands still trembled at the edges. Something bumped the wall once, light but deliberate. Then came a deep inhale through the crack by the window frame. Damp and heavy, the same bellows rhythm I had heard by the pens, now at arm's length through cedar no thicker than my thumb. The scrape stopped, and for 3 seconds the only sound was rain ticking off the porch roof. Then the wall jumped under a blunt impact that shuddered through the studs and rattled a coffee mug off the sink. I did not fire. I held my sight line on the seam and listened to that breathing pull in and out. Wet and steady, so close I could track each cycle by the way the curtain edge trembled. My phone showed 1 bar. I called Luis anyway. He picked up to static and broken syllables. "Bo, where?" "It hit the wall," I said. "East side, hard. I do not think this cabin holds if it commits." A burst of noise swallowed his reply. Then I caught, 2 minutes, low crossing. Stay. The line died. I called county dispatch next. Got a ring. Then silence. Tried again. Failed. I keyed my Ranger handheld to the preserve repeater and got nothing but storm hiss, the same dead channel I heard during brush fire outages. I texted Elena 1 sentence, "Do not come to East Lot," and the message sat unsent under the spinning icon. By 12:31, I was alone in a 1-room cedar box with a predator testing the walls and every formal route of help thinned down to static. The second impact came higher near the window frame. Wood cracked sharp, then groaned. A vertical line opened in the interior paneling where an old stud split, and a strip of cooler night air slid through carrying wet fur stink and that sour metallic edge. I told myself to stay organized, same as I had with snake bites, flash floods, and wildfire evacuations. Inventory, exit, timing. I took the go bag from under the table, clipped the sidearm to my belt, slung the rifle, and grabbed the flare gun from the shelf above the sink. The plan had been sitting in my head for 3 nights. Ugly and simple. If the cabin failed, I would pull it toward the stockyard, where I'd staged 2 diesel cans, portable floodlights on a generator, and the squeeze-chute lane that narrowed movement to 1 corridor. Fire for separation. Light for target ID. Steel rails for geometry. No heroics, no trophy hunt. Just seconds bought and distance created. Another scrape dragged across the siding, slower this time, claws reading grain. Then the breathing moved from the east wall to the front door side in 3 silent steps I could not map. It was searching for my movement through the structure. I killed every interior light. Darkness dropped hard. Outside, lightning flashed behind cloud and gave me 1 pale snapshot of the room, then black again. I slid the rear window up, eased the screen out, and listened. No alarm chirps, no goats, no insects. Only rain runoff and that deep inhale now near the porch. I went out feet first, lowered myself, and landed in mud behind the cabin with my ribs flaring where the wall strike had thrown me against the table edge. I bit down and stayed low. The truck sat 20 feet to my left, nose out, keys still in my pocket. Taking it now would give me speed, but also headlights, engine noise, and a fixed path it could cut off. The stockyard sat 40 yards right through a drainage dip and a rusted gate opening. I chose the yard, half crouched. I moved along the back wall, boots placing on gravel instead of wet leaves. At the cabin corner, I risked a glance. A shape detached from the porch darkness, tall enough to blot the doorframe. It had 1 forelimb braced against the wall where the fresh crack showed white wood. The head tilted, listening inward to a room I was no longer in. Rain traced off its shoulders in ropes. I slipped into the drainage and kept moving. When I hit the stockyard gate, I yanked it shut behind me and dropped the pin. The squeeze-chute lane ran ahead between pipe fencing 8 feet wide at the mouth, narrowing to 4.5 near the loading ramp. I had poured a thin diesel strip across that pinch point at dusk, capped both cans and set them back from the line. The generator sat under a tin lean-to with one pull start and two switches taped in the on position. I had rehearsed this in daylight. At night with shaking hands, it felt like trying to thread wire in a crosswind. I pulled once. No start. Pulled again. Engine caught with a cough and climbed to a rough idle. Floodlights snapped on, first one, then both, washing the lane in hard white glare and carving deep shadows everywhere else. The yard went still for half a heartbeat. Then it stepped through the open gate I had left at the far end. Full light hit it, and whatever doubt I had left burned out in one instant. It stood upright first, roughly 8 feet in the floodlights, with a forward hunch that made the shoulders look even broader. The chest was barrel deep and heavily muscled, fur matted flat by rain except where burrs clung in knots along the upper back. Digitigrade legs, loaded beneath it, high hock, long lower segment, built for spring and drive. The arms hung long, ending in those hand-like structures I had seen at the pen, but clearer now. 4 primary digits and a shorter inner claw, each curved, each flexing independently against wet dirt as it shifted stance. Its head was wolf-like only in outline. Up close, the proportions were wrong for any catalog I knew. The muzzle was elongated but thick through the bridge, lips tight over dense teeth that showed even at rest, and the neck rose too vertical from the shoulders, giving the skull an elevated surveying posture. One ear was torn halfway down and laid back in a ragged triangle. The other stood higher, pivoting toward sound in sharp ticks. Scars crossed the right shoulder where fur had parted into pale ridges. Fresh blood, dark in the rain, streaked one flank from an older wound, reopened by movement. The eyes were amber yellow in direct glare, not flat shine now, but focused, tracking me with a level of intent that felt like being measured for outcome. Its breathing rolled out in bellows deep cycles, each exhale fogging faint in cool rain. It did not roar. It did not posture for display. It stared down the lane at me and started forward with controlled stalking steps, bipedal for 3 paces, then dropping to all fours in one compressed motion and accelerating so fast the floodlight shadows jumped. I fired the flare gun at the diesel line. The flare struck, skidded, then took. Flame ripped across the strip in a low orange wall, not high enough to engulf the rails, but bright enough to force a check in its stride. Heat hit my face. Diesel smoke rolled upward and sideways under the rain, stinging my throat. The creature recoiled 2 steps, swung its head away, then angled left, looking for a bypass. The squeeze lane denied it. Steel rails boxed both sides, slick with water and firelight. I brought up the rifle, found shoulder line through heat shimmer, and fired once. The shot hit high near the right shoulder mass and spun it half a step without dropping it. It snapped its head toward me, teeth bared, then drove forward again through a gap where flames had thinned. Second shot. Low, front thigh on the lead leg as it launched. The impact broke momentum just enough. It slammed chest first into the left rail, pipe ringing like struck anvil, then hit the ground, rolled, and came up on all fours with one hind leg dragging for a stride before it compensated. It came anyway. Distance collapsed to maybe 12 yards. I cycled and fired a 3rd time, aiming center shoulder to turn it, not stop it cold. Muzzle flash stuttered the scene into still frames. Jaws open, rain droplets frozen around its muzzle. Claws biting mud. eyes fixed on me and nothing else in the world. The round struck, and this time it veered, not from fear but from recalculation, ricocheting its path off the right rail and using the rebound to gather. Then it did something I had not planned for. It vaulted. From a near standstill, wounded leg and all, it gathered under itself and cleared the 6-foot panel on the far side of the lane in one violent leap, clipped top wire, and landed outside the chute in a spray of mud and sparks from the diesel edge. It hit all fours, surged bipedal for 2 strides, then cut toward the cedar ravine beyond the north fence. I fired once more into dirt behind it to keep pressure as it ran. No visible effect. In 3 seconds it was at the fence line. In 4 it was over, body folding and unfolding with that wrong, efficient gait. In 5 it vanished into cedar black, where floodlight could not reach, leaving only branch whip and one fading chuff from below the ridge. Silence snapped back so hard my ears rang. I kept the rifle up, scanning rail gaps, counting breaths to 20, then 30, waiting for a second charge that did not come. The fire line shrank to broken patches and steam. My ribs were screaming now, each inhale shallow and sharp. Smoke had settled low in the lane, and every breath scratched. A horn sounded from the roadside. 2 short blasts. Luis! I turned and saw his unit lights bouncing through rain at the yard entrance. Relief hit me a half-second before movement at my left flank did. A dark mass exploded from shadow beside the loading ramp. Lower than before, fast and silent until claws hit metal. It was not a full return charge, more a final strike at the nearest moving target. It hit the rear quarter of my truck as I pivoted toward cover, claws screeching across the bed rail and gouging 3 deep channels through paint and steel before momentum carried it off. I threw my left arm up on instinct. One claw raked sleeve and skin from elbow to wrist. Hot and bright pain, then gone. Luis fired from the gate line. Controlled pair into open ground between us and the ravine to break its line. The creature peeled away from the truck, bounded once over the drainage lip, and disappeared down slope for good this time. Brush crashing in a receding diagonal until distance swallowed it. I stayed on my feet about 3 seconds, then sat down hard in mud because my legs stopped negotiating. Luis was on me fast, one hand on my shoulder, the other checking my arm with a light. Talk to me. You hit anywhere else? Ribs, arm, smoke. He looked past me at the lane. The dying fire strip, the bent rail, the blood-dark smear on the left pipe where one of my rounds had connected. Then he looked at the truck bed grooves and back to me. We are leaving now, he said. You drive, or I drive. You drive, I said. And that was the first moment all night I let myself believe I might actually make it to morning. Luis drove with one hand and kept the other braced near the wheel, like he was ready to grab me if I blacked out. I sat twisted against the passenger door, left arm wrapped in a shop towel he had cinched tight above the rake marks, trying to keep pressure while every bump on the Caliche road sent a sharp grind through my ribs. The cab heater was on low, but I was shivering hard enough my teeth clicked. Shock does not feel dramatic. It feels mechanical, like your body forgot which signals matter most and started firing all of them at once. At the paved road, he keyed his radio and got patchy contact with County. Storm interference, repeater trouble, units tied up on flood calls. He gave location, requested medical standby, and said the words, "unknown large predator with officer assist needed." Nobody asked for details over open channel. That silence told me enough. The volunteer fire station sat 15 miles out, cinder block and sodium lights, with 2 bays and a coffee pot that had probably been hot since 1998. We rolled in at 1:12 and the night crew came out fast, turnout pants half-buttoned, med bag already open. I stepped down and almost folded. One of them caught my elbow and sat me on the concrete apron beside the engine. "Name," he said. "Bo Lawson." "What hit you?" "Claw," I said. Then, because I could hear how that sounded, I added, "Large predator, unknown." He did not laugh. He cut my sleeve, flushed the arm, taped gauze, checked pupils, and listened to my chest while I tried not to cough. Every inhale burned from smoke and rain-cooled air. They palpated ribs, got a hiss out of me at the right side, called probable fracture or severe contusion, and put me on oxygen while my hands shook so badly I spilled half a paper cup down my shirt. He passed me another cup without comment. By 1:34, a county deputy arrived, same one who had told me to get sleep after the 217 footfall report. He walked to the truck with his light, traced the grooves carved in the bed rail, then stood there longer than a man stands when he is still deciding whether he believes what he is seeing. He came back to me, crouched, and kept his voice low. "You said something circled your place last week." "Yeah." He nodded once. "I should have pushed harder for a follow-up. That is on me." That was all he gave me, and it mattered more than an apology speech would have. At 2:03, my unsent text finally delivered. Elena called 30 seconds later. I answered on speaker because my hands were taped and clumsy. "Bo, where are you?" "Volunteer station off County Road 8. "I got your message late. I stayed put. Talk to me." It hit the pens. I drew it to the stockyard. "Luis is here. Goats are alive." A breath on her end, then practical as ever. "I am not coming in blind at night. I will meet you at daylight with cutters and boards. You are done for tonight, you hear me?" "I hear you." "Stay where people can see you." That call closed one door in my head. She had gotten the warning. She hadn't driven into the lane blind. I did not have her blood added to the ledger. They sent me to the regional emergency clinic before dawn. X-rays showed 2 cracked ribs, no punctured lung. The arm lacerations needed stitches but not surgery. Mild smoke inhalation, elevated lactate, tremor from shock and adrenaline dump. I stayed under observation until first light with a pulse monitor clipped to my finger and mud still drying on my boots. At 6:18, when the rain finally eased, Luis brought my evidence bag to the bedside chair, my torn sleeve, the aluminum tag that had been set on my doormat, and the glove I had retrieved from the windmill post before we left the ranch. The missing pen never turned up. I noted that in the log, too, because omitted details become holes people can drive doubt through. At 9 o'clock, we went back in daylight with a small team. No hero march, just measured recovery. Elena, Luis, the deputy, and me in a borrowed hard hat because the clinic had taped my own in a blood bag. The stockyard still smelled of diesel and wet ash. The squeeze lane rails were bent where it hit, paint scorched at the pinch point, and on the left pipe a dark smear had dried into a tacky streak. Luis swabbed it. He photographed the impact points, measured fence height at the jump, and tagged the truck bed grooves with scale markers. I cut out the cracked siding section from my cabin wall under his supervision and bagged it in contractor plastic. We pulled camera cards, including the 2 that had black frame gaps, and sealed them in labeled envelopes. At the preserve office that afternoon, I filed 2 reports. The first was official and conservative. wildlife incident with property damage, unidentified large predator, aggressive behavior near livestock and occupied structure, defensive discharge of firearm, no human fatality. I listed injuries, times, coordinates, and environmental conditions. I did not write 8-foot upright wolf-headed anything because I knew exactly where that version would land. It would not land in a field action file. It would land in a stress folder. The second report was verbal, complete, and given face-to-face to 2 people only, Elena and Luis. We sat at Elena's kitchen table with a county map open and my logbook between us. I walked them through every stage from the silence pockets to the eyes at 7 feet, the ridge silhouette enlightening, the goat pen partial, and the full floodlight view in the squeeze lane. I included the sideways blink, the biped to quadruped transitions, the moved objects, the unscrewed bulb, and the ring pattern on the driveway alarms. No embellishment, no guessing motive beyond what behavior suggested. Elena listened with her jaw set and did not interrupt until I finished. I am closing east and north back pastures, she said, indefinitely. We run cattle tighter to house fields and daylight only in the ravine lanes. I can eat that loss. I cannot eat another night like this. Luis tapped the map near the cedar ravine and finally said what his earlier pauses had held. You were not my first unclassifiable depredation in that corridor. You are the first with this much documentation and a live witness at contact distance. I cannot classify it under existing code. I can flag the area as elevated hazard and keep units aware off record. He looked at me. That is the truth I can give you. Lab outcomes came in over the next 3 weeks, and every one was a partial answer. Hair sample from the fence, mammalian, degraded, no conclusive species match. Siding scrapings, mixed organics, trace soil, no clear profile. Blood swab from the rail, insufficient quality for full panel, likely mammalian, non-diagnostic. Camera cards gave me 1 usable sequence from the stockyard floodlights. 3 frames of a dark mass in lane geometry at a height no local canid should reach. Then motion smear and static drop. Enough to validate my account to people already listening. Not enough to force a formal category. Dispatch called back with incident closure language that read like bureaucracy written by exhausted people. Severe weather interference confirmed. Response delayed. Report archived. Under unknown predator conflict. The deputy filed his supplemental statement and included the truck damage photos. Dale from the preserve. Signed my injury paperwork. Stared at the casts on my desk and said, I still do not know what to call it. He never used the monster grin again. He never said he believed me either. That was the last loaded look between us, and it paid off in a different way. He stopped trying to explain it for me. My father believed me after 2 things. First, the medical records, because numbers and imaging do not dramatize. Second, the audio clip from my cabin wall that I had captured 2 nights before the attack. 41 seconds of Cedar Creek and Bellows breathing through plank seams. I played it for him in his living room with the blinds open and the afternoon news on mute. He sat still until it ended, then asked me to play it again. After the second pass, he turned off the television and said very quietly, You're not going back out there alone. We had argued for years in short, hard bursts. That day, we did not argue at all. By the second week of October, I had resigned from field ranger duty and accepted a daylight parks planning role in San Marcos. Desk maps, grant calendars, trail maintenance scheduling, public meetings before sunset. The steadier pay and fixed hours let me put my father's cardiology bills on automatic and keep every follow-up appointment without gambling shifts against gas money. For the first time since his diagnosis, that financial pressure was contained instead of steering every decision I made. I sold my cabin lease rights, moved what I owned in 2 truckloads, and left the line cabin stripped to studs where the damaged siding had been removed. Elena and I stored the physical evidence in sealed bins with duplicate labels, 3 plaster casts, cut siding sections, tagged photos, printed logs, the clipped aluminum tag, my torn sleeve, and backup drives with camera data and audio. 1 bin stayed with Luis under chain documentation. 1 stayed with me in a locked steel trunk. Nothing disappeared, nothing misplaced, nothing turned into feed store entertainment. I changed how I lived in ways a stranger would call excessive until he heard that breathing through a wall. My rental in San Marcos has reinforced exterior doors, laminated windows, motion floods on all sides, 2 cameras per approach, and battery backups tested every month. I keep a go bag by the bed with trauma kit, radio, flashlight, spare charger, and hard copies of emergency contacts. I run drills twice a month, not because panic owns me, but because procedure gives panic less room to improvise. I do not sleep in structures without exterior lighting anymore. I do not work remote nights. I do not step into cedar breaks after dark for any reason that can wait for dawn. Some people from the old office drifted off after hearing rumors. 1 called me unstable to a mutual friend. Another said I'd burned out and spun a predator story to justify quitting. I stopped trying to persuade them. Belief is not a jury verdict. I need to win. Elena kept in touch. Practical updates only. No further attacks on her stock after the pasture closures, but she found 2 bent posts and 1 high bark score that winter near the same ravine lip. She sent photos, then shut that gate again. Message received. I still see Luis every couple of months when county meetings overlap. We talk in plain terms. He asks if my sleep is better. I ask if the corridor has stayed quiet. Last time he said, no confirmations, no clean sign, just enough odd to keep me cautious. That is the category we live with, enough odd. I have been in therapy twice a month since November. We worked the straightforward things first. Startle response, sleep fragmentation, breathing control when wind pushes against siding at night. I still wake around 2 more often than I like, chest tight, listening for scrape patterns that are not there. When that happens, I run the routine. Sit up. Name 5 visible objects. Check camera feed. Drink water. Slow exhale to count 6. It usually passes in 10 minutes. Sometimes longer. I still function. I still work. I still visit my father every Sunday, and now he lets me replace porch lights without pretending he could do it one-handed. If you ask what I think it was, I cannot give you taxonomy with confidence. I can give you behavior, territorial mapping, boundary testing, pattern learning, selective aggression focused on 1 human target, tactical movement between bipedal stalking and quadrupedal bursts, high tolerance for light, noise, and injury until mobility degraded, withdrawal when wounded, constrained, and met with organized resistance. That is not folklore to me. That is a field note written in scars and steel gouges. I am not asking you to adopt my conclusion as your own. I am giving testimony from a man who built his life on measurable systems and kept measuring even when the data stopped fitting any chart he had. One predator, one night of direct contact, one narrow survival outcome. I got out. I changed my life on purpose, and I am safe now. The hills are still out there, cedar and limestone and pockets of dark that do not care what we can name. I respect them differently than I used to, and that is where my story ends.